I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. And this is the I Hate Politics candidate interviews with Tom DeGonia, Bernice Mireku North, John McCarthy, and Perry Paler. All four candidates for the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office. I'm Sunil Dasgupta, host of I Hate Politics. The county state's attorney's office is a down-ballot race of immense importance. The state's attorney is the county's top prosecutor and is critical not only to maintaining the rule of law, but also the color of law, the demeanor of law. Is it to rule or to serve? And the consequences of law. There are judges who determine cases, but the state's attorney decides which cases to bring. He, or maybe someday she, is independently elected and therefore not beholden to the county executive or the county council for their job. But like other down-ballot races like school board, almost 20% of the voters who vote for the governor will leave that race blank, no choice. Incumbent John McCarthy has held the office of state's attorney since 2006. This primary has brought 3 challengers. I will introduce each of them as their interviews come up. Having 4 long-form interviews makes for our longest episode yet, over 2 hours. The advantage is you get a head-to-head comparison. But if you want to skip around, look in the show notes for the timestamps for each candidate. The interviews appear as I recorded them in sequence. Music for this episode comes from Carol Levchenko, an Arlington-based singer-songwriter who is the choir director in Centerville High School in Fairfax County, Virginia.
I'll make some bread, but instead I am stuck in my head. Forgot about the way it felt when we'd say hello. How are you? 'Cause these days we ain't doing so well. This is my quarantine song. Everything feels wrong, but I know it will be okay. Just maybe not today. There's so much.
First up, Tom DeGonia is a defense lawyer in private practice in Montgomery County and a former president of the County Bar Association. He's a former county assistant state's attorney from when Doug Gansler used to be the state's attorney in Montgomery County. Tom DeGonia, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Sunil, thanks for having me. Even though I think we probably all hate politics, I'm happy to be here with you today. So,
you know, the hate politics part is a meta joke, right?
a little tongue-in-cheek there, a little tongue-in-cheek, right?
You're running for Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office. Recently, you wrote an article in the Bethesda Beat focusing on rising crime in Silver Spring, which has also been in the news elsewhere. Is crime rising in Silver Spring in your view?
Crime has been rising. It's been rising not just in Silver Spring, but across the county. Montgomery County recorded a record number of homicides last year, over 35 homicides. In Montgomery County, a record number of carjackings and a record number of PMF guns, or what are commonly known as ghost guns. So crime is on the rise. And really the reason I wrote that article is to say that we've been addressing crime for a certain way, or in a certain way, for the last 20 years. And we have to come up with some new solutions.
Hold that thought for a second. I just want to go back to the data piece here. When you say crime is rising in all those categories, you said 35 homicides. What were they before? What is the increase?
So I believe, and Montgomery County Police only keeps records, homicide records back until 90. And the highest number we ever recorded, I believe, was 30. So in 1 year. and that was a record number several years ago. And that also doesn't really account for the year of the snipers. And I think that may have been only 19 homicides in that year. So 35 homicides for us in a year is a big number.
Yeah, but what was it in 2019, 2018?
I don't have those right. I don't have those right in front of me.
Okay, that's fine. But
less than 35. Less than 35.
Yeah, but how much is the increase? Is my question really?
Okay. I don't know off the top of my head the numbers of the percentage increase.
Let's talk about what your argument is about, the way that crime is being dealt with.
The crime in Silver Spring is there's a problem to be solved. And the response can't be, we're just going to flood the streets with police officers and cameras. That doesn't address the underlying issue. There are major crimes that happen. We had the two young men who got into a fight, and one young man was murdered over a transaction for weed. There are complaints by local businesses about what crimes are being enforced. We have local clubs or night spots that can serve both as businesses, but also as sources of criminal activity. And my genuine complaint is you approach this as a case processor. We put a lot of police in there. We charge a lot of people. That'll solve the problem. Well, it doesn't really address the underlying issues. That is, why are people selling drugs there? You're not working with your law enforcement officers to develop a strategy to identify the people who are the ones responsible for those actions. Likewise, you're not working with your communities and your business owners to identify their priorities. That is, which crimes are the most important to us? Again, I'm not advocating that you go in there and start just arresting everyone who has a little bit of weed on them. And I don't think that that's what the police want to do. But as the state's attorney, you've got to give them some policy guidance and set some appropriate priorities for which cases are we going to go after? How do we work with our community to better solve this problem? And I think that's one of the things that has been really ignored for a number of years until we've reached kind of a crisis point with this one of the more high profile homicides that happen.
Okay. So I take from what you just said two things. One is that you are going to guide the police department by the way that you accept and prosecute cases, and by the way in which you don't take the case forward, right? So that's one way. And that I understand, right? And it's a very typical sort of prosecutor's office approach to guiding police activity. But the other part is, you talk about community, right? What role does the state's attorney have in really looking at that community piece? I mean, what are the businesses going to say to you that you don't already know?
What I'm proposing is really truly community-based prosecution. That is, you're going to have a senior prosecutor who's going to be assigned to that police district, who is going to meet regularly, not just with the police in analyzing crime trends, identifying those trends, but you're going to meet with community leaders. You're going to meet with business owners. And they're going to say, here's what's going on at my business. And are these kids who are doing something? And we have a way to address that. Are these people who are transient, who may not live here, but are coming here to commit crimes? Are these people who live in the community and who are facing addiction issues, who have mental health issues? And if that's the case, then my prosecutor is going to work with not just the police in the community, but other service providers to make sure if this is a person who has a mental health issue, that we're connecting them with the resources. And I think that's what we're saying is different. In my experience, at least with Silver Spring and folks like the Safe Silver Spring, they want to have those conversations. They want to have those meetings. They want to have the input. And I think as the state's attorney, you have an obligation to listen to the community in helping set those enforcement priorities.
What is the basis for your argument? Where do you think this approach is not being taken, and how do you demonstrate that?
I think if you talk to the community members, I think you talk to police officers on the beat who come into court, they're going to say, listen, I don't know why this case was dismissed, and I don't know why this case people went forward on it. I don't think the community understands the priorities, and I don't think law enforcement understands his priorities. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that suddenly he says we're gonna go to war in Silver Spring. We're not going to lose Silver Spring was, I think, the direct quote, and recognizes that it wasn't given the attention that it needs, and that's why, very much like what I'm already proposing, he then says, well, I'm going to assign a senior prosecutor. I'm going to assign 2 prosecutors to look at those cases. I think that's direct evidence that the approach that I'm proposing, this community-based approach, is far superior and is actually going to help solve the problems.
On reading your article, the one solid policy proposal that I took away from it was that you're going to base your a prosecutor, maybe an assistant state's attorney even, at every police district headquarters. So do you think that by doing that, you might sort of harm the independence of the prosecutor's work? And if that they were actually in the state's attorney's office, the central office, then they might have more autonomy, maybe be able to look at, the police more closely and their role.
Well, I mean, I think that's a concern, and we've done it the centralized way under Mr. McCarthy, and I don't think we see any more transparency in the state's attorney's office, and we don't see any more transparency with the police force. I was part of a federal court-appointed monitoring team for the city of Detroit, and I would go in and you would read reports about what was going on in the street, but there is no replacement for being there in person, being in the vehicle to see the policies and practices, to be in the station, to see and hear what's going on. And I think the police officers who want to do better want that guidance. They want someone to help them develop a better case. They want to solve those problems.
That's an interesting example from Detroit. Do you think Montgomery County Police need a federal monitoring unit like that?
No, we're not at that point. And I can tell you that is a far different place. But if we don't take proactive steps, we can't, in Montgomery County, we can't say, well, things are good, let's just keep them the same way they are. It is a constant effort to improve. And that's really what we're talking about here, is a constant effort to continue to improve. We have some wonderful police officers, wonderful people, and I think people who want to do the right thing, and they want the help to do the right thing. And they're not getting that right now from the state's attorney's office.
So you talked about transparency. What do you mean by transparency in the state's attorney's office? And how are you going to achieve it?
I think there are really 2 main areas to focus. One is in policies. That is, what are the policies that we're going to change, or what are our actual policies going to be as it relates to prosecution of drug cases, sentences that you're going to seek, cash bail policies or no cash bail policies, requirements for diversion. Those should be published. They should be clear so that the public understands the priorities, as well as the prosecutors understanding those priorities. And then the second point is the data. That is, what actually happens in cases. In Maryland, we have what's called a automated guideline system, Maryland Automated Guideline System, MAGS. For every felony case that's prosecuted, that has to be completed. And that should be up on a dashboard, so that as a prosecutor making policy decisions, I want to have data-informed prosecutors. I want them to see the bigger picture about their individual decisions. Every case is going to be a case by case for the individual, but I want it to understand what are the numbers, what are the demographics of the numbers, what are the sentences that are sought, what are the sentences that are imposed. That information is captured. I think the public should be aware of that, but I also want to know to help make better decisions. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about transparency.
What percentage of, the state's attorney's office work is actually juvenile focused as opposed to adult focused? I mean, how many adults are we prosecuting, and how many juveniles are we dealing with? And prosecuting is not probably the good word for it.
That's a great question. It would be nice to know. And again, I think the public has a right to know what are the actual numbers, how many cases. Again, not identifying individuals, because we don't identify juveniles. We want to protect their identity. But I can tell you this, that over the last 6 years, of all of the children who were in the juvenile system, 88% of them were children of color. 99% of the children who were charged as adults, that is, they started off in juvenile, they were waived up and charged as adult, 99% were children of color. So there's obviously a disparate impact in communities of color that has gone unaddressed over the last 6 years, absent any COVID numbers at this point.
What do you propose to do about keeping teens out of the criminal justice system?
There are a couple of different approaches. One is working more closely with Montgomery County Public Schools and making sure that they have a memorandum of understanding, and that the state's attorney's office is not a backstop for school discipline issues, and making it clear that if this is a school discipline or behavior issue, it should be dealt with within the school with the resources that they need, whether it's counseling, whether it's a therapist, whether it's school security, that those issues should remain in the school and across the board, because we have some disparate use of this from different high schools and middle schools, that those principals, those assistant principals deal with the discipline issue there and don't kind of default to say, well, this kid's a real problem, he needs to go to juvie. The second thing is, when a child comes into the juvenile system, the Department of Juvenile Services is a state agency, and they're charged with providing the resources necessary to rehabilitate the child to meet their mental health, treatment issues. And sometimes the state just doesn't live up to the expectations of what are needed. And I think there's a real opportunity for the state's attorney to say, listen, we have judges who are receptive to this and who are willing to order the necessary resources to go out within our community. Within Montgomery County, we have other nonprofits, we have other groups who are willing, faith-based organizations, to provide the resources necessary to make sure these kids have a chance to succeed, even if the Department of Juvenile Services is not willing to do that. And that is a natural outgrowth of a community-based approach. If this child is at a church and his pastor is willing to intervene and help out, let's make that part of the solution. If there is a police officer who has taken this young person under their wing and is willing to work with them, let's take advantage of that solution. That's not something the Department of Juvenile Services has in the past historically been very receptive to. And I think that's one of the ways that we can help solve these problems.
Well, how are you going to make the Department of Juvenile Services do what you want?
Well, if the Department of Juvenile Services is unwilling or unable to provide those resources, then we can have a partner, and the court can order that the partner make it part of a probation or make it part of a diversionary agreement that the child participate with a partner, and then we can come back if that's not working. But it's this unwillingness to try new solutions and simply say, well, listen, DJS says they don't need any services, therefore they don't need any services, when everybody who says yes, they do.
Is there a case or two that demonstrates this in your view, or is it your estimation at this point?
No. I mean, I think, well, for example, if a child, and let's talk about a serious offense right now, in the state of Maryland, if a child commits a sexual offense and is adjudicated on that sexual offense, there are not adequate treatment facilities to house and treat that child here. They will send that child out of state. And that is unacceptable, because to separate a child, even if that child has committed a serious offense and needs that rehabilitative effort, to then say, we're going to separate you from whatever support system you have, and we're going to send you out of state because either one, we can't or won't provide that resource, is unacceptable. And we're not going to send kids out of state.
What would you do?
If I have to go to the Department of Juvenile Services and meet with the secretary or the assistant secretary and say, listen, this has got to change and we've got to fix it and we've got to come up with a solution, that's what I'm going to do, because that's the investment we need to have with those kids.
Well, that's kind of, it's not like the director of juvenile services is, just doesn't want to do it. It's probably a funding issue. So I'm not sure what purpose is served if that's not the director's mandate to do. There's legislation and funding and all of that is
right
at stake.
And again, it's not like if I could just pick up the phone and make the call, sure, yeah, anybody would, but it has to be a priority. You have to make it a priority. And then you have to follow up with the agencies, the partners, and develop solutions. If there's not a solution there, and I just think that's not happening right now.
Okay, that was a hypothetical case, right? Not a real one.
Right, hypothetically.
Do you have any real cases that you've seen?
I've dealt with cases on, both as a prosecutor in juvenile court and as a defense attorney. On those types of cases. Correct. And civil cases. So.
And where in those cases, generally, not speaking to specifics, okay, where is it that the state's attorney's office failed?
They failed in identifying and obtaining, either with the help of DJS or through court ordered, adequate resources to address those needs. To ensure that child was rehabilitated, and in doing so, rehabilitated, investing in the safety of the community. And I think it's more of a leadership issue as opposed to the assistance on the line assistance. This is making juvenile justice reform a priority for the office.
Okay. You also said something that was very interesting, that some high schools have a bigger problem of referral than other high schools. Can you identify which high schools have a bigger problem than others? There
was a criminal justice coordinating meeting this month, last week, I think it was, or it may have been earlier this week. And the number of offenses, the chief's office had a chart, and you could see some schools, and I don't have the chart right in front of me, some schools had 1 or 2 incidents reported. Some schools had 15, 20, 25 incidents reported. So there's clearly a different need by high school cluster. But if you just are kind of guessing, you can say, well, some of the I don't want to guess. It's publicly available as to the number of incidents that were reported at each high school, and they may be reported by high school cluster as well. But there were visually distinctions, noticeable differences in the number of cases that are reported. And you don't remember which clusters had? Yeah, I don't have. Okay. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. There was a shooting in Magruder High School recently, and it has revived the debate over the school resource officers, the SROs that were removed from MCPS earlier in the school year. What lessons do you draw from what happened at Magruder? I think there are a couple of lessons learned, and obviously this is still unfolding, and I think we'll get greater detail as the investigation unfolds. But I think let's talk first about the the ghost guns or personally manufactured firearms, and the ability of those to come into anyone's hands, whether it's a child or an adult. And the real challenge is they're unserialized. They don't have a serial number. You don't have to go somewhere to buy them. You can order parts online and assemble them yourselves. In 2019, police seized 16 ghost guns. In 2020, they seized 56 ghost guns. In 2021, they seized 70 ghost guns. Now, the legislature has proposed a ban on ghost guns, and this isn't the first time. I think Delegate Lopez had proposed it 2 or 3 sessions ago. So this is something not unknown. So there's not a comprehensive response to the presence of ghost guns in the community. And I think one of the lessons learned is this unfortunately highlights the lack of a coordinated response. And what I would do to address the ghost gun issue is I'd have a firearms safety task force with a designated prosecutor who's trained in firearms, who understands how these guns are made, where they come from, the internet sites that they may or may not be purchased from. And that prosecutor would be a central repository to work with someone from the police department, someone from the sheriff's office. And the sheriff's office, because the sheriff's office processes protective orders, and they also they seize firearms in those situations. But more importantly, because we're going to have a community-based approach, they will work with the school officials who are security officers, as well as mental health crisis teams in those particular areas, and the community engagement officers who are assigned to those by cluster, so that we're going to have a knowledge of what guns are in and around a particular area and what can we do to intercede.
Let's talk about the SROs and the lesson you drew that having a law enforcement officer having a prior relationship with the school was important. How did the Magruder case show you that?
In a circumstance like this, seconds matter, minutes matter. That officer who knows the layout of the school, simply. And long-term, they have a relationship and they can, speak with, the administrators can speak comfortably with somebody who they know and can trust their judgment, their recommendations about when something should or shouldn't be reported. And I think when you've got a better relationship, you're going to have a better flow of information. Not that the officer has to be there as an enforcement mechanism, but I think this is important for a long-term relationship with law enforcement into the future, is that kids see.
And you don't think this is backdoor SRO?
No, I don't think this is backdoor SRO. I think it is a knowledge base. And it's not unlike an officer who patrols a mall, or an officer who has a knowledge of, we have lots of federal facilities. Police officers who may be responding to emergent situations need to have a knowledge of where they're responding. And I think that those community engagement officers, engagement is a part of that. And that is showing people that police officers are not just there, to be, just law enforcement, but they're to be there and as an engagement officer. And I think that's part of building back some trust.
One of the criticisms of the SRO program was, in fact, that it targeted Black and brown children more. And as you mentioned, most of the arrests in school are Black and brown, and most of the juveniles tried as adults are Black and brown. So the SRO program, they said, was feeding the school to prison pipeline.
It wasn't just the mere presence of SROs. And I think the presence of the SRO in the schools, contributed certainly to that. And I think that was the experience. And we have to acknowledge that everyone's experience is not the same at every school with an SRO, right? But the fact that, Montgomery County Public Schools, instead of dealing with some of the discipline issues, defaulted to having, oh, wait a minute, I have an SRO here. Let me just call her and she can make the arrest and I don't have to deal with this. That was part of the issue as well.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Right.
So when you have those prior relationships, you tend to leverage them.
But to my point, what you have to do is you have to draw a bright line and say, I'm not here for school discipline. I am here for public safety emergency situations. But my presence is one that should help be a calming one and not be used as a disciplinary tool. And that's part of the education and culture change that we have to deal with.
Tom DeGonia, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you, Sunil. Always great to hear from you, and thanks for having me on the show.
You can find out more about Tom DeGonia at tomdegonia2022.com and follow him on Twitter at Tom4Moco2022. Up next, Bernice Miracle North.
Shows my longing for live music grows. This is my quarantine song. Everything feels wrong, but I know it will be okay.
Bernice Miracle North is a lawyer in private practice in Montgomery County after having been a prosecutor in Anne Arundel County. She served as the co-chair of the county's Reimagining Public Safety Task Force, which, among other recommendations, asked for a revamp of the School Resource Officer program. Bernice Miracle North, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you for having me.
You're running for Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office. What do you think are the big issues?
The heart of the issue really for Montgomery County is a couple things. One, transparency. Two, accountability. I'm going to add a third, mass incarceration, and how are we tackling that? And so one of the reasons why I decided to run for office is that I felt that there was a disconnect between the status quo and what the community was looking for in terms of real progressive criminal justice reform.
Let's talk about them one by one. When you say transparency, what do you mean? Where are things opaque?
Good question. Well, the real opaque nature of the office is talking about statistics. The number of cases that are being referred to diversion, for instance, not a lot of information there. How cases are being pled out, not a lot of information there. Information that when I was on the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force for Montgomery County, we were crying for that information and it wasn't there. And if we don't have information, we're just shooting arrows in the dark, hoping for the best. But if it's not rooted in truth, then is it actually going to be effective in making any change happen?
Okay, so is that information available and not public, or is that information not even collected?
How it's collected really depends upon the state's attorney. The information can be available. It's how people determine, for instance, it's how people determine whether someone should get promoted, for instance. I mean, if that's a criteria for the prosecutor, the county prosecutor. In terms of the number of cases that are being sent to trial, the number of cases that are being pled out, those things can be definitely accumulated if you have the right staff to create the information. Is that being collected, though? That depends upon the prosecutor who's being elected. I know that currently there is a study, I think a $500,000 study being done as to whether there's any bias in the office. I am presuming that's going to be the opportunity for information to be collected. How much that information is collected is also a transparency issue. Is it going to be a year's worth, 2 years worth? We don't know. There's no parameters at this point that's available for the public to know.
Would it be in the interest of a state's attorney to do that, right? Or do we have to have some kind of legal framework within which that happens? I don't know if you're following the Judicial Proceedings Committee. They had some prosecutors up at a hearing, and the prosecutors were quite adamant that, there wasn't the need for reform. I should say the Montgomery County State's Attorney was not there, as far as I remember, but maybe I'm wrong.
I've heard highlights from the hearing, and from my understanding, it's a difficult position to put a prosecutor under such an intense microscope, because it's already a hard job. It's already a hard job, no doubt about that. But as I mentioned earlier, we're at a time where we are seeking more transparency in the system to make sure we're not perpetuating racism, to make sure we're not perpetuating unnecessary mass incarceration. It is beyond just our role as prosecutors, but it's really helping us strengthen our democracy.
So you think that the bill that is currently in the General Assembly goes too far then?
I haven't gone to the weeds of that bill at the time we're doing this interview, unfortunately. I just heard a couple of highlights and some of the criticism. So I understand where the prosecutors are coming from, but I also understand Delegate Moon's point about being more transparent and holding prosecutors accountable for wrongdoing.
Can you say something about how the state's attorney can influence or not police reform and where we are with that in Montgomery County?
Well, with Montgomery County and its law enforcement, from my viewpoint, the status quo and law enforcement kind of go hand in hand, as it theoretically should be, right? Because we're all in the same boat in trying to make sure justice being sought. But we have to understand that officers make mistakes, especially with use of force, especially with how things are reported in their police reports. Those things need to be alerted to, and people need to be held accountable for their mistakes. Because if we don't hold them accountable as prosecutors, the fear and the distrust of the system is only going to exacerbate, and that's not going to bode well for anybody who wants public safety to be a top priority in their community. So I've talked to other people in the community about use of force and how that's scrutinized. In different districts in Montgomery County, how use of force cases are being received and investigated vary. And that's not the Montgomery County that I think we need to have. I think we need to treat everybody equally and fairly. And if it's going to require an opportunity, for instance, the State's Attorney's Office to be the central point of all the use of force complaints, to investigate whether there should be charges going forward or not. That's something that I have definitely considered. I know has been done in Chicago under District Attorney Kim Cook. They have their own use of force unit. They investigate cases. And I'm sure there will be some pushback, from police unions and the like, but having a centralized place to have those complaints heard and at least looked at is something that is definitely doable, and it can be immediate action towards helping with police reform in the prosecutor's office.
So you're going to have a specialist group or task force or whatever it is that looks into use of force complaints in Montgomery County if you were elected?
It can be either one or two people or a unit. Yes, it just depends upon the budget and what we have room to do. Because not only is there an opportunity to review use of force complaints by hiring somebody, it can also be done with the screening unit itself at the prosecutor's level. Before a case is even brought to a prosecutor's desk, there is an individual or individuals that screen the charges from the district court commissioner to determine whether a case should be stayed in district court as a misdemeanor or bumped into more serious cases at the felony level. There can be an opportunity there for just the screening unit to add on the role and responsibilities of looking at use of force complaints. But again, it's going to depend on the budget and where things stand at the time when I'm elected in terms of what's affordable.
So what is the budget of the state's attorney's office?
Well, approximately $500,000 goes to victim and witness services, approximately a little over $2 million is for juvenile division, a little over $2 million is for district court. And I want to say it's about double at the felony level. And this is just my estimates in my head as we're talking about this. And one thing that startles me about the budget is I think budgets reflect, is a moral document and reflects the morals of the office. And the fact that we have just as much money going to juvenile division as district court bothers me a great deal. There are less kids in the system than there are just everyday citizens in the district court level. And the fact that we're putting that much money into criminalizing youth is a red flag to me, and that needs to change. Also the fact that there's $500,000 going to victim witness services when, for one, we are dealing with a exacerbated amount of victims dealing with violent crimes. is something that bothers me, because I think we need to increase the funding for that as well, especially in light of everything that's gone on in the pandemic and the number of violent crimes that have increased and the victims that have suffered as a result.
That's interesting. So you think that that the state's attorney's office currently puts too much money into juvenile justice issues, and that results in more criminalizing more? Could you not make that argument that by putting in more money, that they are handling the cases better, even though there are fewer juvenile cases than there are adult cases?
Well, if they were handling juvenile cases better, then why is there an uptick in juvenile crime? I think that's really the issue that I'm having. Some things work to an extent. If they no longer work, they need to change. And having an opportunity to perhaps utilize the resources from community agencies instead of the State Attorney's Office is a possibility that can lower the funds going towards juvenile division. A big chunk of that is the truancy program. So it's going to be a matter of evaluating the effectiveness of the program, what's working, what's not working, and are we getting our bang for a buck for putting all that money into the truancy?
The implication of what you were saying about juvenile crime is sort of speaks to juvenile crime numbers as being a reporting artifact rather than a general increase of criminal activity. And some people have made that claim. Do you see a general increase in criminal activity, in the county, or maybe even more generally? Or do you think the uptick in the numbers of juveniles in the system is simply a reporting artifact?
Well, I would say in terms of the uptick is really with 15, 16-year-olds getting locked up, because the 16-year-olds are becoming adults. So there's that factor as well. I think generally we are dealing with less crime overall, but the uptick is among a particular generation of individuals. That's the uptick that alarms me, 13 to 16, 17-year-olds, carjacking, sexual assaults, all these crimes that involve disrespect of other people and their things, not so much property crimes. Not a lot of people are going into buildings and getting stuff. It's just a disregard of the human person. And that's really disregard. And that's the issue right now. We've come out of a pandemic after almost 18 months of isolation. People don't know how to act right now, for lack of a better phrase. And we have to deal with the fact that we have to retrain ourselves how to interact with everybody, how to deal with conflict that's not going to resort to going online and getting a ghost gun. It's not going to resort to using a knife to protect themselves. Those types of immature decisions is what's leading these 16-year-olds, unfortunately, to get adult convictions. It's what's leading 13, 14-year-olds to be victims of sexual assault or accused of sexual assault. I know that I read recently, that's the highest uptick in youth crime in the school, sexual assaults. No one's talking about that. That's tremendously sad, because again, it's going to the fact that we're not learning how to respect one another right now.
What can the state's attorney do about these social problems?
There's two things. One, prosecutor is really the bullhorn for the community to let them know any problems that are occurring that they're seeing within the criminal justice system for our youth. If they're seeing an uptick in violent crimes, that allows the prosecutor to have an opportunity to speak to the public and talk about the violent crimes that are happening with the youth. And it gives the community a charge to say, what can we do about this? How can we improve the lives of our young people? What resources are out there that they're not getting? And that leads me to my second point. What a prosecutor can do is really develop some diversion programs, making sure that we are doing everything we can to deal with the trauma and the harm that juveniles are going through, rather than just putting them through the criminal justice system as a defendant or as a juvenile delinquent. Now, currently, there is a truancy program in the system, in the office, but there's not much else. And I think we need to expand our diversion options to focus more on restorative nature as opposed to just dealing with, making sure kids goes to school. And the restorative nature of these diversion programs should include how a juvenile can help a victim become whole when the offense has occurred. I know in DC they have something similar where they allow these restorative justice circles to take place between the juvenile and the victim. There's also an opportunity to really deal with the other root causes of the kid's trauma and pain, really, and that comes with just lack of resources. If you have a parent in Montgomery County who desperately wants to keep their kid in Montgomery County, since they have to work 2 or 3 jobs, and they're not going to have time with their kids as much. What are we doing with these kids' time when their parents are out working variously hard to keep their lifestyle in Montgomery County? That's going to include possibly helping other nonprofits or other youth development programs like soccer programs or the like, to make sure that they have the proper investments to help students.
You use the term bullhorn to describe one role of the prosecutor. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you think that bullhorn might lead, especially if it talks a lot about rising juvenile crime, might lead to tough on crime policies or a demand for tough on crime policies, and then sort of overdo things as a consequence.
The power of the bullhorn is a great one. It can set the trajectory for a community that's focused on tough on crime, let's bring the SROs back, or it can focus on the fact that we need to have more empathy for our children, or the fact that we need to deal with restorative justice measures. Everyone is not always in the criminal justice system. So a lot of people in Montgomery County rely on the words and the wisdom of the prosecutor to tell the community as to what's going on and what makes sense. And what makes sense for us to make sure that everyone's feeling safe. Right now, as I go through this campaign, there's a lot of talk of what can a prosecutor do to feel safe and to make us safe again? What's going on with the high crime? How do you fix it? And if I say add more police, then the community is going to just fall into that because not everyone is in the system or has experience dealing with the criminal justice system in Montgomery County. That's just the honest truth. But if we have a prosecutor that says, no, there's more to it than that. There's more to it. There's more to the fact that there are communities that are hurting economically. There is a lot of trauma from any issues at the home that they've had to deal with for 18 months in isolation. Those are things that we need a prosecutor to vocalize to the community, so we can garner the empathy and garner the understanding that's necessary for all of us to coexist. Montgomery County is not a homogeneous county by any stretch of the imagination, right? 1 in 3 are foreign born. And we're not all the same. I mean, you and I, are not Montgomery County residents, but we come from different backgrounds. And the key is to have a prosecutor that understands that diversity and tries to provide information to the public about how to be safe in light of the diverse populations that exist.
So we've already talked a little bit about accountability, which is the second point that you brought up at the beginning. Do you have any sense of what else accountability means in the context of the state's attorney's office currently?
Well, accountability, we touched on it a bit earlier, but accountability will really not just deal with prosecutors and police, but not being afraid to hold other facets of the criminal justice system accountable. For instance, if there's an issue with pretrial detention, for instance, what circumstances are happening in pretrial that's allowing an individual to suddenly violate it while they're on house arrest. The prosecutor can have some influence there, at least with the pretrial coordinator, as to what the conditions should be pending trial. Accountability really runs the whole circuit. I'm including even judges in that because you just have to make sure that we're doing it right. Because if we don't have someone in the office making sure that we're all trying to do our best to do it right, then it's going to go into this whole good old boys, old-fashioned network that is exclusive and not inclusive of all the community members. So the pretrial is just one example. If there's issues with sentencing and there's disagreement with the judge, there should be accountability there too.
What does the accountability of the judge look like in Montgomery County?
It's interesting. Well, I think that it's first of all, it's going to involve some conversations, off the bench, of course, because I think having a good prosecutor from Montgomery County is someone that's willing to work with the diversity of judges on the bench, circuit court and district court, as well as the clerk of the court and other and the sheriff and other aspects of the criminal justice system. So having those conversations, off the bench is of course very, very important. It allows us to have a smoother system for the people to see when they do go to court, and it also increases trust among all the parties involved. Having these conversations probably on a monthly basis. I know when I was a prosecutor, that's definitely what occurred. Conversations between the judges, the prosecutors that led the divisions, the state's attorney himself, because I was a prosecutor in Anne Arundel County, so I'm thinking of my old boss, the late Frank Weathersby. But those are conversations that need to be had. And if you have a prosecutor that's willing to have these conversations with the diversity of folks on the table, then that's how real accountability is done. So it's not just, outwardly, blasting people on the media, because that shows that there's a discord behind the scenes.
Do you think the bench in Montgomery County is diverse?
I think it is definitely on the road to becoming more diverse, for sure. I think without question, the bench is doing everything they can to make sure that it's a bench that reflects the diversity of Montgomery County. District Court bench has definitely had a huge diverse turnaround in the last several years, And I think Circuit Court is on its way. I think it's on its way. I mean, keep in mind, these judicial appointments are for 15 years. 15 years is a long time. And a lot of changes can occur in 15 years. People's mindsets can change or not change with the times. So I think the next few years, there's going to be a real great opportunity to really diversify the bench. I'm very confident in that because I know there's a number of people that are term limited due to retirement age.
Let's talk about the third point you made early on, which is mass incarceration. Describe the problem and tell us what you would do.
Mm-hmm. Well, the problem that actually has been heard about in the media is the fact that Maryland, next to Mississippi, has the highest number of Black males between, I believe, 18 and 24 incarcerated. That's a statistic very specific to Maryland, but mass incarceration is a problem that is a situation nationwide, because with mass incarceration, when you have put someone through the system, through prison or jail, local jail, it's not just making sure the punishment fits the crime. It's the fact that this punishment is causing someone to not have their father anymore, or their mother. It's causing communities to be shattered, families to be shattered, and that goes with pretrial detention as well. That can be a situation. I mean, I include mass incarceration in that conversation because there's still a period in one's life where there's extreme upheaval and turmoil because they're not free. They're not free to do what they have to do to get their bills paid or to take care of their family because of this pending case. And so how to solve that is really changing the way we are seeing the cases that come into the office to begin with. One thing that I have been plugging and preaching about it during this campaign is at the start of the process, when the prosecutor is getting the charge from the district court commissioners or the police department, or even a civilian complaint, we have to look at not just whether the facts fit the crime alleged, we have to look at the racial component of it all. And so I have looked into getting perhaps a racial equity analyst or a data analyst to help us determine, is there any disproportionate treatment of certain communities with regards to particular crimes. For instance, if we're seeing a number of, I'm just hypothetically speaking, seeing a number of sexual assault cases at a particular school, who are the individuals involved in that case? I mean, what's the racial makeup? How frequently has it been occurring? At what period of time? That's just an example to consider, as well as, okay, yes, these facts also fit the crime of second degree assault, first degree assault, and the like. I think we need to have not just that component, but also having a social economic component too. And that would include bringing on a social worker at that stage. Because if we decide at that stage what to charge and what not to charge, that's really half the battle. Because once that case goes through the process of getting a trial date or potentially thinking of a plea offer, it's through the system, right? Because there has to be pre-trial conditions and all that. But if we can find a way to kind of weed out these cases, as well as being
But what do you use to weed out cases? I mean, I would imagine that there'll be a furor if you sort of weeded out a lot of cases of sexual assault, wherever they occur. I mean, that may be not easy to do.
Right. And so the sexual assault case is more just understanding the social, the social or racial component of that. Because
what do you mean by social and racial component of that?
Well, history has shown, I'll go into that. So history has shown us that, for instance, I'm thinking of Emmett Till, the case of Emmett Till, and how he was, young African-American boy that, whistled to a white woman. And we all, most of us that know history know the story of, how he was killed by a white mob because of that, right? Having that understanding of our society's history with that is critical.
But do you think that is happening?
Oh, I mean, it's part of the fabric of our country. I mean, racism is part of the fabric of our country. And if we don't deal with that on the onset, we are exacerbating the problems of distrust in the criminal justice system. Now, I brought up sexual assault just to bring that particular example, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to weed out sexual assault cases, but we have to be mindful of that history before we look at those cases and prosecute them as they should be.
Okay, gotcha. So you mentioned that Maryland has a black male incarceration problem, which is true.
Yes.
Is this also a Montgomery County problem?
Yes, because I think that Montgomery County, Montgomery County is the largest county in the state of Maryland. And the fact that we don't play a role in that is really doing us a disservice, because it doesn't mean, just because we're Montgomery County doesn't mean we don't have that problems. Like, that mentality is a very old school mentality.
So I was saying there's an abstract argument that could be made. We are 1/6 of Maryland, so therefore we are 1/6 of the problem. That's an abstract argument, conceptual argument. But do you see that in actual numbers and that are available to you?
I'm glad you said that, because we don't have the numbers available to us. And that goes to the transparency issue. Just saying, oh, that's not our problem or that's Baltimore's problem. How do we know that? And this is the transparency that I know as a member and a co-chair of the Reimagine Public Safety Task Force. We're looking for this data. We're looking for this data to help us understand. If there is indeed a problem, let us know. Otherwise, we're just going to go based upon what we're hearing about and what we're sensing in the community.
Bernice Miracle North, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking with you. I enjoyed it.
You can find out more about Bernice Miracle North at miraclenorth.com and follow her on Twitter at Miracle North. Up next, incumbent John McCarthy.
Okay. Just maybe not today. It'll be okay one day.
John McCarthy started in Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office as a young lawyer in 1982. He was Deputy State's Attorney for 10 years before becoming the State's Attorney in 2006. If he wins in 2022, he will have served as State's Attorney for 20 years in Montgomery County. John McCarthy, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
You had talked recently about rising crime in Montgomery County, and particularly in Silver Spring, and you had proposed some solutions to them. Can you lay out what the exact sort of increase is about, and where it's coming from, and also how much it is, right? And what your proposals are.
Let me begin by saying the increase in crime runs completely against the grain of what has happened for 14 consecutive years. When I first became state's attorney, the average daily jail population was 906 people. We got it down into the 500s. Pandemic came. During the first 14 years I was state's attorney, crime declined in Montgomery County by 29.6%. That was 3 times the national decline in crime and more than double the decline of crime in Maryland overall. So has there been an uptick in crime? Overall crime, again, I've got to go back and look at the statistics from the police. In the last couple of years, we've had some crazy kinds of things happen, like COVID, where in 1 year, 2020, there were 50% less calls for service to the police. People didn't come out of their houses, and arrests declined. There have been spikes, and the spikes have been in areas that have gotten a lot of publicity and certainly got my attention. I will say to you that regionally in Washington, D.C., not exclusive to Montgomery County, we've had an uptick in carjackings. Disproportionately, those carjackings were being committed by younger people. In many instances, those were younger people who were not attending school because school was out. I joined 2 task forces, one a regional Washington, D.C. local jurisdiction task force to address carjackings. And there has been a substantial decline in carjackings in Montgomery County. Our peak was probably around December or January of would have been December of 20 and January of 21. There has been a substantial decline in carjackings as a result of our involvement in that task force, the dedication of resources by the Montgomery County Police, and our collaboration not only with our regional partners, but I also joined with the U.S. Attorney for the state of Maryland. He was the acting U.S. Attorney at the time, Eric Barron. We now have a new U.S. Attorney. But in any instance, we worked with both our federal and our local partners in dealing with the issue. It was a regional issue that affected all of us. And our numbers are way down now from where they were as a result of those efforts. Look, I think because disproportionately a lot of them were kids that were doing it. These were not professional car thieves. These were kids in many instances that were doing it almost. Look, I don't want to call a carjacking as a lark because there can be attending violence to these carjackings. But the reality is kids were stealing cars for rides home and abandoning the cars a couple of blocks away from their house. These were not professional car thieves. So that's one of the areas where we saw an uptick in crime. A second area where we saw an uptick in crime was in the overall homicide rate. I've been involved in looking at homicides here in Montgomery County for decades. I think that the overall number of homicides in Montgomery County was the second largest in our history that we've ever had last year. And I will tell you, when you look at the numbers, it really is a diverse. They were diverse in the sense that what drove the homicide, it wasn't like all gang related. It wasn't all domestic related. It wasn't all drug related. It really was a cross section of murders. So it was hard as we began to analyze it. You begin to see that there are all different types of crime. Some of them may have grown out of domestic tensions brought on to a certain extent by COVID. Some have been brought on, I think, by the explosion of guns in our community in general and ghost guns in particular. I'm a member of a group that is working along with the Attorney General for the state of Maryland, Brian Frosch, and Senator Susan Lee from Bethesda, and Delegate Lopez from Montgomery County, to see that we ban ghost guns. We have seen an uptick in homicides. Some have been accomplished with ghost guns. And I think the homicide issue and the gun issue cannot be divorced one from the other, nor can the ghost gun issue be divorced from it. We unfortunately, I believe this is the statistic that the Attorney General cited at the press conference that I attended along with him, that there were 12,000 ghost guns mailed into Montgomery, not Montgomery County homes, Maryland homes last year. That's an astounding number. And we know many of these guns are being shipped to children, 14, 15, 16 years old.
I want to go back to some of the statistics that you started with. And you said that the call rate during the COVID year, 2020, was down significantly. But the December 2020 carjacking rate was highest ever.
If you're going to do a statistical comparison meaningfully, you really should, in terms of crime trends, you should really skip 20. If you go 18, 19, and then go to 21, the overall crime numbers are relatively the same.
Except carjackings, everything else was basically flat, 18, 19, 21.
I think the numbers are relatively consistent, except for carjackings for the first couple of months of 2021, and homicide, which was a problem throughout the entire year.
You also said that certain parts of the county were more clustered with crime and other parts were not. Could you identify which parts are more crime bound in the county and which parts are not?
There have been huge concerns raised by the Silver Spring residential community and business community, and there have been concerns and clusters up in the Germantown, Gaithersburg area. And then there have been concerns in schools. Germantown, Gaithersburg, schools generally, and the Silver Spring, particularly in the central business district, there have been areas of concern raised by individuals that we have been working with.
Are there crimes, specific types of crimes that are associated with these different venues, if you will?
We have a really diverse community, right? And when you go out and I talk, and I go to a business meeting with about 100 people down in Silver Spring about a month ago, 5 weeks ago, there were business leaders that wanted the police to increase police presence by 50% in Silver Spring. They wanted them to bring a substation and put it at the intersection of Colesville Road and Georgia. There were citizens that a lot of the people that talked, some were the business community, but there were a lot of private citizens that were talked about. A young woman talked about buying a house near the intersection of Georgia and Bonifant, and guns having been fired into her residence from gunfire out on the street. I mean, there were anecdotal stories told by a series of people of things that concerned them. They were calling for a greater police presence in Silver Spring. Some suggested that we, some is just by numbers, make there be a greater presence for police. Some suggested relocating a substation there. Some suggested, and I think this is being done, by the way, there is a study underway because, for instance, using this merely as an example, a lot of the issues, the biggest issues, let's say in Silver Spring, were late night issues between midnight and 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So we are beginning to analyze, taking testimony and anecdotally from the people in the community, they felt a lot of this stuff was happening very late in the evening from bars in different locations. So we are doing a study. I've been in communication with the county executive. They have safety patrols that go out on Friday and Saturday nights. They are trying to make sure that people are in compliance, not selling liquor too late, they're not staying open too late, because we do think that some of these associated activities, to some extent, are driving crime down there in the very early morning hours down in Silver Spring. So they're trying to intelligently deal with it through enforcement, not arrest, but through enforcement of code violation.
These are all anecdotal stories that you mentioned from the public, but you have access to a comprehensive picture of what's going on. So I want to know what your recommendation is.
One of the things I think we need to do, one of the underlying challenges is rebuilding public trust between the community and the police. And because I do believe, and I think this is in many areas of our county, where in some instances there is the most violence. There is not always cooperation or coordination with the police. Now, I think the police bear some responsibility for having created that situation, but I also believe that we have a police force that is a good police force, that is trying to work with the community. And if we want to address crime, we need partnerships. We need conversation. We need communication. We need the community organizations, the business community, the police to work together intelligently and communicate with one another and civilly. I think a lot of this is, I will tell you, this is a national issue. This is a national issue. One of the things that I think that does in fact correlate to the increase in crime is I do think that being a police officer is harder now than ever. I don't think they feel respected. And I do think that there is a concept that Jim Comey talked about years ago. Across this country, there's a little bit of depolicing going on. And as a result, I don't think that the police are engaging in doing some of the things they did before when crime was lower. And to some extent, I think we've had some issues and situations where the police have decided not to engage because they were afraid they would get in trouble if they engaged or arrested to break up, a drug area or something like that. And they were getting mixed signals, I think, as to what they should do about addressing those issues in various parts of the county.
I have several questions now. So the first is, who is giving the mixed signals?
Not me.
Well, then who?
I'm just going to, it's not me.
It's okay to point outwards, but I mean, if you're going to point outwards, then you have to point.
I think that there has been some misdirection as to what we need to do to make us a safe community. And I think, there's a reason that we didn't reach 25% goal in getting any men or women in this community to join our police force this year.
What is that reason?
I think we need to support the police and encourage them to do their jobs. And I think that we can reduce crime in the community. Look, we need to diversify the number of people that we need to diversify our police force. And I think there's been some efforts to do this. We need to make sure that the police department looks like the community we serve.
So why doesn't it?
The police force is much more diverse now in Montgomery County than it was when I got here. There's no question that I think your question presupposes that they've not made substantial progress towards diversifying the force. I think they have, but the community continues to become increasingly more diverse, which I think is an additional challenge to make sure that I think it's important in law enforcement that we reflect the community. And when you have the people that are in the front lines having contact with the people in the community are the police, I think it's very important for them to look like the community so that people feel comfortable. Because I think the number one way to deal with crime in a community is to build a partnership between the community and the police. If you have that partnership, that it's not, that's sometimes hard to do. We need that partnership, and we need people in the community. I guess this whole idea of I'm in favor of community policing. I'm in favor of police officers getting out of the car. I'm in favor of police officers walking a beat, getting to know people in the community, knowing the shopkeepers, knowing the business owners.
So why do you think that the public has lost trust in the police, which is what you said earlier?
I think you are exaggerating and overstating what I said. I think there's a different, in certain segments of the community, is there a distrust of the police? Yes.
Why?
But do I think generally across the board in Montgomery County, I don't know that is the majority sentiment, but it is a significant sentiment, and it's one that we have to deal with in our community.
But you did identify lack of public trust as a reason why the police are disengaging.
Okay, let me say this. Lack of public trust, not across the board. I think there's a lack of public trust in certain segments of the community. Look, I participated in many different, the reimagining of policing in Montgomery County. I listened to their conversations. I go to public meetings all the time. I listen. I mean, there's no way that you cannot go to these meetings and not walk away with the idea that there are some individuals who are disenchanted with the way we police in Montgomery County.
Is it individuals? Is it sections of society, as you said?
I do think that disproportionately, I think that people who are Black or brown, minority members of our community, feel that they have not always been policed fairly. And so I think disproportionately, I think most of the national conversation, most of the local conversation occurs along those lines.
Okay.
And
do you believe that is correct? I mean, do you believe that they have been policed fairly or unfairly?
Oh, I definitely think there's institutional racism to a certain extent in the way we've policed. I think that's undeniable. I don't mean that to be an indictment of an entire department either, though, because I think the vast majority of people who are police officers do their job well.
There is institutional racism in law enforcement, as you pointed out. Mm-hmm. What have you done in so many years of being state's attorney to fight that? How diverse is the state's attorney's office?
I have multiple answers to that. Number one, right now I am hired a group called PPI, who is doing a racial bias ethnic study about the entire operation of the state's attorney's office. I'm the first prosecutor's office in the history of the state of Maryland who's opened up its books to an independent outside agency with full permission for them to publish the results of their thing. Now, the study of my operation is being done by the Graduate School of Criminology at the University of Maryland. Number two, everyone that's on my staff has already gone through 2 different classes on implicit bias. We have it trained internally about implicit bias. Number 3, I've attempted to hire and have hired a working staff that reflects the community that we serve. I also will tell you, in terms of police use of force, communities are very concerned about, and I think this is particularly members of the Black and brown community, the disproportionate way in which police use force against them. Well, when President Obama in 2015 issued his investigative report on policing in the 21st century, in 2015, not last week, I became the first prosecutor in the country to adopt the recommendation that we should independently have independent prosecutors review and make decisions about the prosecution of police officers within an individual department. Prosecutors who have ongoing relationships with police should not be doing it. When the topic of body cameras came up, again, this goes back to 2000, again, not last, 2014, 2015. Who was the first major jurisdiction and who was the loudest voice in Maryland shouting to adopt body cameras and put them on the street for all police officers? It was me. It was Montgomery County. We have 9 police departments. We have 2,000 officers, and nearly all of them have body cameras on there.
How many Black and brown people do you have on your prosecutorial staff?
I have 170 people that work for me. About 85 of them are attorneys. About 20 of the attorneys are people of color. About 20 of my staff.
So about 25%?
65% of my staff are women.
Aren't 65% of lawyers women now?
Well, as a matter of fact, the profession I joined was primarily men, but American law schools have graduated more women than men in every single calendar year since 1990.
That's
so
right.
I don't. You're absolutely right.
That's right. So 65% women is not that's to be expected.
The vast majority of my teams are headed by women. My district court.
But you have a 25% number for Black and brown prosecutorial staff. That's 25%. The county is almost 60% Black and brown.
My numbers are substantially have increased. There's no comparison to the number of Black or brown attorneys that are now in my office based on where I came from when I got there. It has substantially increased. And by the way, we also hire people from the Asian American community. Our conversation has been about Black and brown. I didn't include individuals who are Chinese. I didn't include people that are Indian American. I didn't include people that were from Pakistan. I didn't include people that were from Lebanon. My number would be a higher percentage if I added in those other constituent groups as well.
Okay. Let me ask you about the study that you have commissioned.
Okay.
So the study was commissioned last year, I believe, in 2020?
Yes, I think we have been talking to various groups for a very long time, trying to get this done.
What was the holdup?
The initial group we went to wouldn't do our study.
Why not?
They didn't have the manpower to do it.
When do you expect the report to come out?
It's going to come in stages, but I would say that some of the numbers will be out the early part of next year. And then what we want to do is we want to put up what we call a dashboard, which would be on our website. And on the dashboard, there would be information that any member of the public could access at any point in time on a continuing basis.
I want to ask you, why you waited this long to just before your election to appoint a commission to look at your work around this. It seems like it is around your reelection strategy.
Your question has false assumptions in it. I've been trying for years, the last couple of years, to get somebody to say they would do this for us.
But you said you went to Vera and Vera told you to go to PPI. How did it take years?
Well, because then what happens, you go to them and then the group says to you, let's see what your data looks like. You have to understand that we build case management systems to manage cases. There are legitimate questions, let's say questions about race that are being asked. And in some instances, that kind of data wasn't in our case file. That's not what we wrote down. People are asking, how many people are white, Black, brown that you indicted? We didn't capture the data that way because we have a case management system. It's called Justware. We're about to switch over to a new system in July because our contract with the other provider ran out. People are asking for questions now that are different. We designed our case.
But we are asking this question. President Obama's Reimagining Police report came out in 2015, as you pointed out. So we've been asking these questions for at least 7 years. So, to say that, oh, we'll only do it in 2020 now that the election's coming.
Well, the reality is the progressive record of my office is unparalleled. During the period of time that I've been in the office, 35 people have been made judges or magistrates from the office because we have hired the best. Let me finish the statement. Where did the first Chinese American ever made a judge in the state of Maryland come from? Eric Nee, my office. Where did the first openly gay woman come from who made the bench in the state of Maryland? My office. Where did the first African American woman who ever was made a district court judge in the history of the state of Maryland come from? My office. Her name is Carla Smith. She's now a circuit court judge. Where did the first Asian American judge who has ever sat on the appellate court in the history of the state of Maryland come from? Her name is Roz Tang. She was appointed. She is on the Court of Special Appeals. I hired her right out of law school. There are two Hispanic judges in the entire court system in Montgomery County. Where did they come from? My office. One of them, Victor Del Pino, at some point in time was a team leader for me. So if you look at hiring well, mentoring people, being Jeannie Cho, first Korean woman ever on the district court bench in the history of Montgomery County, from my office. First Korean woman, first Chinese, first African American. We have a track record of not only hiring within the office, promoting, mentoring. They have risen to the highest levels of being involved in the law in Montgomery County. No one can touch that record because we provided a diverse opportunity for people from every segment of our community. And if you look at those numbers and you look at where the people have gone who came here, who worked here in this office, and what impact we've had a tremendous, we are proud of those men and women. And we continue to do that. This month alone, I had 3 people that worked for me that were made judges or magistrate this month.
So this is interesting. So you have a lot of your old staff on the bench. That means that you have a great relationship, hopefully, with the bench, and that you can get things, you can work out things with the bench, with judges and all of that. Because, the whole reform of criminal justice, it includes the bench as well, right? How do you describe what needs to happen on the judge's side with criminal justice reform?
Well, it's interesting. I'm still trying to figure this out. There's a new bill, and I have not taken a position on this yet. I'll give you an example. It's interesting you bring it up because it was on the front page of the Daily Record yesterday. Daily Record is kind of the newspaper for lawyers and business people in Maryland. But there's a bill where they want to establish a report card for how judges sentence citizens in crimes of violence. And I will tell you, the judges are opposed to it. If you begin to publish some of the sentences that are given, particularly in crimes of violence, there might be some public condemnation that might come back to the judges. And people are afraid of how that's going to work out. In Maryland, we have Maryland sentencing guidelines. They are statewide. And as a result, there are common factors. Whenever a sentence is reached in any case, we don't have separate factors in Montgomery. We're not supposed to. We're not supposed to have separate factors. There are unique factors, including, for instance, what was the nature of the crime? There's some crimes that are high numbers. Was there a weapon used? Was there injury? Was there death? Was the victim a especially vulnerable victim? Was the defendant on parole? Whether on probation? What was their criminal history? And then you get a grid, and there's a suggested sentence. My office is a guideline sentence. My office is a guideline office as a general proposition. We make recommendations within the sentencing guidelines, which are established by this grid, which is a statewide grid.
Do you think those sentencing guidelines are appropriate?
that is a very simple question to a very complex answer. In some instances, for instance, in the area of child abuse, I think they are woefully low and inadequate. In the area of drug crimes, and I think they're dealing with it this year, they may be too severe. May I say to you, just as another example of dealing with race issues in the court, all right? In 2014, Maryland made de minimis amounts of marijuana. They decriminalized 10 grams or less. When they did that, I brought together the chiefs of police of all 9 police departments, and I said, in 2014, I don't want to prosecute possession of marijuana anymore. I knew the disproportionate impact and the disproportionate way in which marijuana laws in particular were enforced in this country. I thought that it didn't make sense. We stopped prosecuting. We were the first jurisdiction in Maryland to do that years before Baltimore, years before anybody else. We stopped doing that.
Once you stopped prosecuting 10 grams and less of marijuana possession, did the racial makeup of the disparity in prosecutions change as a consequence of that?
Look, it would have to have an impact. It would have to have an impact. So I guess the answer is yes.
But that's an abstract proposition. Is it or is it not? You stopped this in 2014, so we should have empirical evidence.
And that's what the study's doing. That's exactly why we're doing the study.
But it's going to come out after the election, and it's going to be immaterial in that way. We can't, voters can't choose them.
Well, I think there are so many different. We were on all of these issues about police use of force, body camera, decriminalization of marijuana. We were first. We reduced jail population down 36%. Crimes down. The issues that people are talking about in terms of absolute numbers, there was over incarceration. We've dropped our jail goes from 906 to under 600. That's what people want. The disproportionate prosecution of marijuana, we're not doing that. Independent reviews of police use of force cases, we're doing that. They want body cameras.
What part of your state office's budget goes to juvenile justice and related matters? Maybe I'm using the wrong terms for it.
Well, I do have a team of individuals who are specially trained to prosecute and handle and evaluate cases involving children. Now, in Montgomery County, let's say if you took a typical group of 100 kids who are potentially charged with a crime, all right? My office only sees about 20% of those kids. Why? There's a restorative justice program that we work with Montgomery County schools. Simple possession of drugs, I don't mean it. It's be an example. Under the restorative justice model, a child possessing a narcotic on a school property is technically a crime. We have been progressively trying to attempt to allow the schools to deal with those issues initially at the school level through counseling and work in the schools without referring it to the courts. Now, obviously, if that becomes a repeat situation, it makes its way to the courts. When matters get referred to the courts initially, an arrest takes place, the first thing that happens is there's a review to determine whether or not the issue with the child is a mental health issue or a drug issue or an alcohol issue. If it is, we will divert that child to SASCA, which is a division of mental health, or we'll divert it to teen court, which is a program that we run as a diversion for kids. Those diversions come from the police. Then, after we've gone through the schools, after we've gone through that diversionary lens, we then get to the DJS, the Department of Juvenile Services. Every child who is charged with a crime has to go through DJS. Now, there are some crimes like murder, they have to forward to us. But the vast majority of crimes, they are allowed to informally adjust those cases at DJS. And they adjust about 55% of the cases they see they informally adjust. It may be because little Johnny threw a rock through his neighbor's window and he's got to write an apology letter to the neighbor, for throwing a rock through the window, or maybe the parents agree to pay restitution. We informally adjust it. That's about 55% of the cases. Then cases come to my office, and of the cases that come to my office, about an additional 17% are, again, it's like a filter. About 17% of them. We additionally sometimes will refer more kids to health department or to do a diversion program. And then sometimes we drop the cases. We have a drop rate of at least 10% because we look at the cases and think the case is not a viable case. It's not a prosecutable case. Maybe there's something wrong with the search. Maybe if the case was based on a statement, the statement the case is not worthy of prosecution. So by the time you actually appear before the court, again, I don't think people understand how this thing filters out. We see about 1 in 5 kids that come into the system.
Okay, so can you tell me what percentage of the office's budget goes to juvenile-related issues?
You're asking for the numbers in a way I don't think they're maintained. All right, I have a unique juvenile staff. It has a chief and a deputy chief. There are multiple assistants. There are multiple aides, and they work exclusively on juvenile matters. We probably touch somewhere along the lines of about 2,500 juvenile cases a year total. Adult cases, we do maybe 22,000. So you're saying it's half the budget towards juvenile cases. In terms of our caseload, the juvenile matters are, 10% of our work.
But is that same thing true of the budget?
Clearly, we have a number of different teams. We have district court, which is all adult. They do 17,000 cases by itself. There's 20 attorneys in that unit. Again, I would say if there are 10% of our staff, they're probably about 10% of our budget. I don't know. Look, that's an estimate. You're asking me for. I've never analyzed it that way. It's not your question doesn't fit into how we run the office.
John McCarthy, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics.
Okay, thank you very much.
You can find out more about John McCarthy at johnmccarthy.us. I wasn't able to find a personal or campaign Twitter account, but the state's attorney's office Twitter is at MCSAO News. Up next, and lastly, Perry Paler.
My longing for live music grows. This is my quarantine song.
Perry Paler is Deputy State's Attorney in neighboring Prince George's County, though he grew up and lives in Montgomery. He has been in private practice and headed the Guns and Drugs Unit in Prince George's State's Attorney's Office. Perry Paler, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Good morning, Sunil. Thank you. It's great to be here today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about my vision for justice in Montgomery County.
All right, so you want to be state's attorney in the county. What are the issues you think that the new state's attorney will have to address?
Yeah. The main thing is that criminal justice is evolving. It's evolving throughout the country, and it's not evolving at the appropriate pace here in Montgomery County. The areas that I'll focus on is expanding diversion programs, juvenile justice, and how that looks in Montgomery County. We're going to be at the forefront at the intersection of behavioral health and the criminal justice system. And then there's the major issues of the integrity and accountability issues. Two things that I'll bring with me as experience dealing with a conviction and sentencing integrity unit, and also a public integrity unit. And, we can get deeper into that, but the conviction and sentencing integrity unit will, upon application, really take a hard look with fresh eyes at disproportionate both convictions, where there may not have been sufficient evidence, or there may be new evidence, obviously with technology and DNA, and then also sentences. We know sometimes that, certain populations were subjected to unnecessarily harsh sentences, particularly when they were outside of guidelines, whether or not it was appropriate to apply enhancements. Also, we're going to have a public integrity unit. That unit will, focus on police accountability, particularly as it relates to use of force and fatal shootings. And then we'll also hold public officials accountable as well. So those are some of the things that we're going to bring to the office that I think is in step with where justice is evolving nationwide. And we see it, quite frankly, here in Montgomery County.
Can you say how criminal justice is evolving and exactly where Montgomery County is not evolving?
One of the things is the use of diversion program. So I see my role as a state attorney is to be able to deliver a workforce that's not bogged down with a lot of criminal convictions, particularly for first-time offenders and nonviolent offenders. And so with the creation and the expansion of diversion programs, and I want to define it, but diversion, anytime within that period between arrest and criminal conviction, there's a timeline, there's different hearings, there's discovery. But during that period, you can offer programs, whether it's therapy, whether it's restorative justice, where you interact with alleged victims, whether, it's community service, where you get the accountability piece. And then upon completion of the conditions, once the conditions are met, then the case is dismissed. So you get the accountability piece, and then you also get someone whose record is preserved and can enter the workforce. Along with the diversion programs, particularly the ones I work with in my current position as Deputy State's Attorney in Prince George's County, we offer an education component.
Your goal is to not prosecute minor offenses so that it releases your attorneys to do other work.
Yes, but I want to be clear about the word prosecute, right? So in my mind, prosecute means more than, it's in a more expansive role than taking a case to conviction, right? And so once an arrest has been made by the police and the case has been charged, now I find it in my office. So now it needs to be reviewed, and we need to have an objective review of what's best for all involved. And if we believe diversion is an appropriate recommendation, then we would set that case on a path where that defendant would have the opportunity to receive the appropriate treatment or receive the appropriate opportunity for education, things of that nature. And then once we get the treatment, once we get the accountability piece, if we make a decision to dismiss the case when that person has completed the program and shown that they really have atoned for that behavior, then that case can be dismissed. And the last point, but I don't see that as not prosecuted.
Can you preemptively identify what these small offenses are that bogs down attorneys in Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office?
Yeah, and I would say, some of the possession cases, other than marijuana, to be quite candid, right? Some possession cases, minor theft cases, assault cases, sometimes when, you might have gentlemen fighting at a bar, and when a bouncer gets involved, they might get assault charges, things like that. So we would evaluate.
But how much of the state's attorney's work currently is that kind of thing you think is minor?
Yeah, the district court dockets are pretty heavy. So I would say there's a substantial amount of cases charged in the district court that could be resolved through diversion.
Do you think that's like 50% of the cases? You think 80% of the cases or 20%? I mean, is there a sense you have of how much you would actually be able to do by identifying and focusing on these things and going, okay, these are diversion cases. Let's test them for that purpose.
In Maryland, we have two courts, the misdemeanor court. All charges start out in the misdemeanor court, even homicides. Everything is charged. They get a CR number, right? And then cases are reviewed and determined to be indicted. So a homicide would be reviewed if there's sufficient evidence, probable cause, grand jury funds, or criminal information is filed, then they're indicted. So those cases are headed to circuit court. So I would say about 30% of the cases that remain in district court could be ripe for diversion.
Okay. What is that number in Prince George's where you work now?
I would say about the same, about 35 to 40%. Yeah. And we do offer it in a number of cases. We have a whole traffic diversion.
Of the 30% of cases in Prince George's and in Montgomery, how many are actually diverted? Comparative.
Well, yeah, I know we do much more. We do, because we have more programs. We run about 7 or 8 diversion programs out of our office.
From the 30% pool that you mentioned, how many are actually being diverted?
Out of the eligible pool?
Yeah, potentially.
30% of cases, I mean, I have to get you that. I don't have the hard numbers.
How much better is Prince George's than Montgomery in this respect?
I would say a lot better.
What is that measure that you're using to come to the conclusion that Prince George's is better?
Well, what I can tell you is, like, for instance, the programs that I discussed aren't even online here in Montgomery County. So, you know, for instance, let me give you.
We want to look at the end, right? We want to look at the output, right? Not just at the input number. What is your output number? I mean, what impact are you having there that is not happening here?
Well, what my response to you is that we are seeing lives change. And I'll give you 2 examples. We run a program called the Back on Track program. It was started by Kamala Harris, and when she was district attorney of San Francisco. You have a drug dealer, a drug offender, and this is not someone seeking addiction treatment. You have a drug dealer, they're arrested, they're charged with the drug offense, first-time drug dealer. They have to enter a plea of guilty. They get the conviction on their record. Then they're offered the program known as Back on Track, where they have to complete 280 hours of community service. We do a diagnostic, and we determine where they are in terms of their education. And we offer everything from a GED to a certificate program through the community college, all the way through an associate's that we pay for. Then there's life training skills. We have counseling, but we also connect folks with our employment services through the program. It's an 18-month program. We have a graduation. On graduation day, you get a probation before judgment, you get an immediate expungement, and often you have immediate employment. When the Brave Boy administration came online, that they had about 2 to 3 persons in that program. Now we've increased it to 25. There is no comparable program like that in Montgomery County.
Sure, I understand that. But what program does Montgomery County have?
Nothing compared to what we have. Nothing that compares to that.
There must be some, right?
Well, the one program that they do is for minor thefts. They will continue your case. You go down and you can sign up for some community service. Upon completion, they will dismiss your case. But they don't have like I said, the life skills training, the counseling, things of that nature, they don't offer. I want to talk about another program, a reentry program that we offer. And we're the pilot program for the state in Prince George's County, where we recognize that we had a high number of offenders between the ages of 17 and 25 that will be returning from prison. So we started a program called Emerging Adults. And in that we work with a nonprofit, and we began the counseling a year to 8 months before they return. We actually have been meeting through Zoom. We have candidates. We talk about housing insecurity. We talk about education, where they are in terms of their education, where they are in terms of employment, and trying to make sure that they have these pieces in place upon their release. So we don't wait until release to try to get things in order. We put things in order with the incarcerated person for a period of 8 months. Then when they graduate from the program and release, they have their ducks in a row ready to go. And there's no comparable program like that in Montgomery County. So when you say, Perry, what are the numbers? It's 0 compared to, and we did the first cohort and we had about eight returning citizens. We're going to expand that program, and I'm going to bring that program to Montgomery County when I'm state's attorney. We started the Juvenile Lifers program. That program was adopted by the state to what we know as the Juvenile Justice Reinvestment Act, where we have worked with 2 juvenile offenders who were given life, and based on a review of their sentence, we felt like it was appropriate. After 20 years, they served 20 years of their life sentence. We were able to make compelling arguments for their release, and one was actually hired, in our office. And so that's something that we're extremely proud of. So for you to say, what are the numbers compared to Montgomery County when they don't offer those programs, it's not apples to apples.
A lot of the discussion that we have had is around, young people. And that really goes into, I think, juvenile justice as well. Sort of, you're talking about 17 to 25, but it's, also, you mentioned high school students at some point. And juvenile justice is a big part of this, right? What do we do wrong in terms of juvenile justice in Montgomery County? In your view, what do you think needs to be done? You can compare that with Prince George's as well, if you would like.
Right. Well, look, one of the things that we know that young Black and brown youth are charged as adults at an extremely inordinate amount here in Montgomery County. What
is that number? Why is that extraordinary?
Between 2011 and 2020, youth of color comprised 90% of the detained population and 100% of the juveniles charged as adults. So 100% of the juveniles charged as adults.
What is that number in Prince George's?
It's a different demographic in the county because right now, Montgomery County, we only make up 18% of the population, whereas we're 65%, African Americans are 65% of Prince George's County. So that, once again, right. And so I can comfortably say they might make up 75 to 80% of those charged as adults, but it's not the same pool because we only make up 18% of Montgomery County. Right.
All right. Do you have a jurisdiction that looks more like Montgomery County that you can speak to?
No, and I'm gonna tell you what's interesting is just Montgomery County is one of the most diverse counties on the planet, right? And particularly we have cities such as Rockville, unincorporated areas such as Silver Spring that are extremely diverse, Gaithersburg. So Montgomery County is unique. Sadly, though, where we see lack of diversity is in our young population that's charged as adults. So we are charged at an extremely high rate for crimes that might not necessarily be charged and where they might not necessarily have to stay in adult court. So here's what I want to talk about. I always use the 4 letters ABCD, and that's adolescent brain cognitive disorder. We know that the brain science has taught us that, males in particular mature at somewhere at the age of 25, 26. And sadly, you can be charged as an adult as young as 14 in Maryland, right? But one of the things that I plan on bringing here is to have a behavioral health specialist under contract to review all the cases when a young person is charged as adult to make sure that when it is appropriate, they have the opportunity to be waived back to juvenile court and receive the treatment based on their particular needs. So the motto of our office is going to be see the whole person. We want to make sure that our judges and our prosecutors see the whole person when we're making an evaluation of what is the appropriate disposition for that person.
Your comparative perspective on over-representation of Black and brown kids who are charged as adults is the population number, okay? Which is one way of looking at it, right? Another way of looking at it is, across jurisdictions. Are there other jurisdictions that do better than Montgomery in this respect? Do you know them?
No, I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that have the same demographic makeup as Montgomery County. We can look at other jurisdictions who do not have the same amount of diversity as us, right? And still see that they have higher populations of African-American youth and are not charging African-American youth as adults at the same rate as Montgomery County.
So what is that jurisdiction?
Well, I would say Prince George's County, and I would say even the District of Columbia, who still, the demographics are changing there, but they don't charge at the same rate. Any rate is lower than 100%, right? So 100% of the juveniles that are charged as adults are Black and brown in Montgomery County. And so I'm confident if you look at Howard County, I'm confident if you look at Anne Arundel or Prince George's, it's not the same rate. And so one of the things is that—
Why do you think we have this problem?
Well, I think it starts at the top. And I think what we need to do is be able to evaluate. It's sadly, it's culturally legitimate to have our young men, Black and brown young men, to be deemed as adults.
But what's peculiar about Montgomery County that it happens, right? Why does not the same thing happen elsewhere?
I think part of it, I would say, is the lack of diversity in that office. And part of it is I don't believe that they're keeping up with the times where we would have a behavioral health specialist evaluate the DGS report and make a recommendation. And that's why I go back to ABCD when we talk about, some of the cognitive disorders that have gone from childhood adverse experiences, things of that nature. We don't hear that coming out of the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office now.
Do you know that the current State's Attorney's Office does not have or does not contract behavioral health specialists?
I am not aware of it. I practiced defense for 15 years, and I was not aware of it. And we have not seen any evidence of that thus far. So, I don't know for what recommendations. I have not seen that state's attorney, or I'm not aware of, or my colleagues have not informed me that they brought a doctor in to testify whether or not this person should remain in adult court or be waived down to juvenile court. And I'm not talking about someone from Department of Juvenile Services. I'm not talking about DJS. I'm talking about someone retained by the state's attorney to give them an independent analysis that they can rely on when representing the whole person to the court.
But we do have mental health court.
Yes, he does have mental health court.
Does that not function the same way?
No, that doesn't go into the evaluation of whether or not a juvenile should be retained in adult court. That doesn't. But
does that mitigate the problem?
No, not as it relates to juveniles, because they're not benefiting from mental health court. We don't want them, and there's not, for mental health court, there's a diagnosis and an illness. This is different than whether a juvenile has reached the age of maturity such that they need to be in adult court. I think they're just two separate. I don't want to blend them together because they're just two separate things, right? And so there's no illness in whether a person has matured to a certain level such that they should be responsible for their actions as an adult. And we know that they should, the science has told us based on brain development that they're still children and would benefit from treatment. And if our expert tells us, and I tend to believe what the case law, the Supreme Court cases said, that these children brains are not developed to the point where they can appreciate their action. And if we can show that they benefit from treatment, then I believe they should be kept in juvenile court.
Well, that's an interesting position you make. Actually, it's very interesting. The first law to make, children up until 26, actually children, is Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act, and it allows your children to remain on your health plan for that long. So, we are moving in that direction. Car companies will not rent to young people. Are you of the view that, maybe we should delay driver's licenses because their brains are not developed as well? Do you think, selective service should be delayed? Have you thought about that at all? Because the consequence of saying that these are children is a big one.
Well, I actually, living here in the county, we have provisional driver's license, and I think that's a good thing, right? So I would say provisional driver's license up until 18. What we're finding now is that some people that, are waiting past 16 on their own. They just aren't.
But do you want it to change legally such that? that the legal structure comes in, compliance with what we know about brain science as you just described.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know enough about it in terms of how it impacts driving. I wouldn't be opposed, particularly if there was data that showed that as it relates to speeding tickets and accidents, particularly accidents with injury. If we see an increase in that particular group, then I think that it's something worth looking into. But that was the benefit of a provisional license, because I believe at first when you get your license, you have to ride with a parent for a while. And the benefit of, for a lot of 16-year-olds, they still live at home with their family. So they get that kind of opportunity to gradually expand and improve their driving skills. You don't want a first-time driver, 18 or 21, to have a job, move to Chicago, and here, by the way, here's your driver's license. And you're like, wait a second. Here you get a chance to kind of live in the comfort of your home with your family, but you're learning to drive on streets where you're familiar, right? Streets you grew up on. And so there's a benefit to that before even waiting until 18. Because think about it. Not everyone goes to college, but college or the military, you might not have an occasion to drive. You can get your driver's license at 18 and then you're on campus for 6 months at a time, or you can be in the service and you're on a base. So now you're not really getting the opportunity to continue to drive. So I believe, I really thought I benefited, and I think a lot of young people do, from that 2-year period of being at home, 16 to 18, where you're driving on familiar roads and you have loved ones that can ride with you before you're just thrust out into the cruel, mean world without any support.
You said that you want to have a conviction sentencing unit that will look at historically and perhaps look forward at where, are those sentences appropriate? I think that's the purpose of them, and then sort of make a determination about how to proceed. That's, I understand that. But you also talked about a public integrity unit. Tell me your concerns about public integrity. And, you talked about holding public officials accountable. Tell me about where you think Montgomery County public officials are not accountable and where there is a need for public integrity unit in the state's attorney's office.
Yeah, well, one of the things, and having not investigated, but if I was the state's attorney with this issue with the CAO, the last CAO in these books, I don't know what was going on, but that would have been something I would have investigated, right? You
mean Andrew Klein and his...
Yes, yes. So I'm not sure of the issue. I don't want to say anything that wasn't there, but I would have had someone at least.
That seems very, really small sort of side
issue. It could be small, right? But voters need to know that someone's holding them accountable. And you can investigate and nothing could be there, right? But we saw what happened to the former mayor.
But do you have any other sort of larger examples than that?
Well, not necessarily, but that's because sometimes people don't have a place to report. What you'll find is particularly when you have a public integrity unit, is sometimes there's two things. There's not a place where people are comfortable making reports. And then on top of that, there's not a place where people trust and have anonymity to know that they can make such reports. So,
but is your need for this hypothetical or is it real?
No, it's real. It's real. We need to hold public officials accountable.
Yeah, I understand that. But do you think that the current system of holding public officials accountable, we have an IG, we have, other forms of accountability, including elections, are they not working in your view?
No, but I think as a state's attorney, it's my responsibility to have a place where people can report criminal allegations to our office.
And the current state's attorney's office, there is no place to do that?
There's not to my knowledge, no.
But the state's attorney will say that, why don't you just come to me? I will, if there's a true public corruption issue, I'm sure he's not a person to back down from that one.
Well, you have to talk to him, right, about that. But I know it's my plan to have a public integrity unit. And one of the main things where I disagree with the current system is as it relates to police fatalities, fatal shootings in the county. This system that, working out with the state attorney in Howard County is not something I would continue.
Can you explain the current state of affairs with respect to how Montgomery County deals with use of force and police shooting, fatalities in particular, involving the police.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that there's an arrangement with the Howard County State's Attorney's Office that police fatalities, fatal shootings by police in Montgomery County are prosecuted by Howard County State's Attorney's Office. And to the extent Howard County has police fatal shootings, those are sent to Montgomery County. And for whatever purpose, they believe that gives them a sense of independence. I don't want to speak for the current state's attorney, but what I can tell you is that, it's my role when the voters put me in, they are depending on me to hold our police accountable.
Sure, but why is the current system not working? Why is it broken, you think?
Because I have seen, first of all, there's an inordinate amount of time from Howard County. Their investigators aren't familiar with the county, right? But also, when questions are asked of the current state's attorney in Montgomery County, it's always deferred to the person in Howard County, where people need to know they can look me in my eye and understand I'm the person handling the case, and they will get all the answers they need directly from me. No one voted for the state's attorney for Howard County that lives in this county, right? And so it's important that people know, as a state's attorney, I can maintain objectivity and I can protect the citizens of Montgomery County from all crimes, including police fatalities. They have to have that confidence that I can do that job. And I'm the only candidate. I have sued police departments. I've sued police departments for wrongful death. And I work in an office where we have prosecuted officers. We have homicide case pending right now for illegal shooting of a citizen. That was actually, I'm not gonna get into facts, but so it's not strange for me. I come from a culture where we hold our police accountable ourselves. We don't send it out to somebody else. And that's a practice I will bring to Montgomery County when I'm state's attorney.
Perry Paler, thank you for coming on I Hate Politics. Good luck in the campaign.
Thank you. And I've enjoyed my time here, and please invite me back when you get a chance.
You can find out more about Perry Paler at perrypaler.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at Perry Paler. That's all for this mega episode. Music for this episode comes from Arlington singer-songwriter Carol Levchenko, who is a choir director in Centerville High School in Fairfax County, Virginia. I hope you'll listen, like, and share the show as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Bring me a little water now. Bring me a little water, Sylvie. Every little once in a while. Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie. Bring it in a bucket now. Bring it in a bucket, Sylvie. Every little once in a while. Sylvie, come running, bucket in my hand. I will bring a little water fast as I can.